So, let's see. What else? How about data manipulation? That's something that we certainly need to know. So I'm going to use Nano and open up my file. And I'm just going to create something here. I just deleted the text. Let's see. Let's put in, how about some conferences? Who doesn't love security conferences? How about, well, the first one I ever went to and the first one I ever spoke at, ShmooCon. And that is typically in like February or January. And I don't know how to spell February, so January it is. And let's see, Black Hat, that's always a big one. Hopefully I can spell Black Hat. And that's typically in July or August. July is easier to spell. Let's see, I went to this one in Norway once called HackCon. That was really fun. And that was in April. Always like to go to interesting places. BrewCon's a good one too in Belgium. This is by no means like a complete list, obviously. These are just a few that are popping into my mind. And let's see. How about one more? Let's not do DEF CON because I'll need that one later. How about Hacker Halted? I'll do it as one word because it'll screw up my chart otherwise. And that's typically in, I think, October. So I've just got a set of conferences and when they are typically held. I'll save that so that, again, Control X and this time Y for yes for saving. Of course, I can cat out that file. And what if we want to do some data manipulation? What if I only want to see the conference names? What if I need to throw out all of the months? Do I have to edit it and line by line get rid of it? I mean, with this many, that wouldn't be that big of a deal. But it certainly could be if it was a really long file. So luckily, no, we have other options. We can cat out my file, pipe it into grep, so that shift and then the bar is a pipe. So that's going to take the output of cat my file and then pipe it as input into whatever my next command is. I'm going to pipe it into grep. And it doesn't like that. And I'm not sure why it doesn't like that. It should. But what I can also do is I can actually grep. Oh, duh. I just figured out what I did wrong. So, open to grep. What did I do wrong? I didn't tell it what I wanted to grep for. So, no matter how long you use Linux, you'll keep making mistakes, particularly in videos. So, if that's the only mistake I make, then we'll be good. So, grep is going to look for a specific pattern, and it wants an actual pattern for me to look for. I didn't give it any pattern, so I just didn't know what to do, so it gave me usage information. So if I grep for, say, what if I want just a B? We'll grab everything that has a B in it, so Black Hat and BrewCon. And I mentioned I could also do, if I wanted to grab just the first part of the line, there's a few different ways to do this. I like cut. So I'm going to say cut with the delimiter, -D is space, and -F for the field. And I want field 1. And that'll grab just the first field. I can also like string more of these together, so I could do cat my file, grep for B, pipe that, so another pipe into cut, delimiter, space, field is 2, and that'll get just the months for those two that start with B's or have a B in them. And of course we can also put these into a file, like my file 2. So that'll take the results and put them in a file. In some cases you might have like long lists that have more than one of the same thing. So say if I did, not the case here, but particularly when I'm working with IP addresses and I only want like unique entries, this comes up. So I put in like ShmooCon again, and January. And if I did just my cut, so there's 2 Januaries in here. So if I typed it again and did sort -u, now we see that there's only 1 January. So that took only unique entries there. So that's a little something extra that would be nice, because if I only want 1, I don't want overlaps. There are certainly other ways to manipulate data. Like there's sed and awk and lots of different other ones that you can use. I have found that I can do pretty much everything I want to do with cut and grep, but perhaps I'm just simple about what I want to do. So you can certainly look at other manipulators like sed, awk. There's other ones as well for what you want to do. So whatever works for you. You know, but generally I find that the best way to learn how to use Linux, or anything for that matter, is to just use it, and every time you come up against something you don't know how to do, instead of switching back to Windows or your Mac, you can figure it out. Go on Google. StackOverflow.com generally has answers to everything, so it's worth checking out. So a few more miscellaneous things with Linux, and then we'll move on. So how about installing packages? How we do that on this particular flavor of Linux, there are other versions that use like RPM instead of apt-get, but on this one, if we wanted to install a package that wasn't installed on here, but it had an entry in the repositories, I do apt-get install, and then for instance Armitage. It's going to install our Armitage. We're not going to use Armitage in this class, but Armitage is basically a front end for Metasploit, and it is good for using with Teams, so something you might want to check out. Again, we're not going to use it in this particular class, but it is an interesting tool that you might find worth spending your time on. So if we do, let's see, what else? How about services? So currently, we don't have anything listening on any ports anywhere. If I do a netstat-antp, it says we were at some point talking to probably those web servers or the repositories for Kali to get Armitage, but we don't have any listening ports right now. So, and if you're not familiar with the port, it's not the Ethernet port on the back of the computer, though I did once have a manager at work who thought so, back when I had a job. But these are just going to be network sockets, so there are 65,535 TCP and 65,535 UDP, so you can imagine how that would be rather cumbersome on the back of a laptop. But again, these are just going to be network sockets, so we open up a socket that we could listen on for incoming data or call out to another socket. So we'll see that a lot in this class, so no worries there. But currently there's nothing listening, but what's something we might want to have listening? How about a web server? What if we wanted to serve web pages? Well, luckily Kali comes with a web server installed, so we don't have to worry about setting one up. What we would do is service Apache 2 and start. That's going to take the service Apache 2 and start it. And it starts that up. So now if I do a netstat-antp, we have port 80 listening. Port 80 is the typical port for web servers, so that makes sense. Now we have 80 listening. Of course, we can stop it as well. Same way we can do Apache 2 stop if we want to stop it. And while we're on the subject of networking, I wonder what my IP address is. By default, Kali will use DHCP, so it will automatically pull an IP address from your router. So if you're on host only, it'll pull it from VMware's host only network. If you're on bridged, it'll pull it from whatever router your computer is using. To get an IP address, it'll act as though it's a completely different machine. We could do IF config as opposed to IP config for Windows. Windows has to be different, but Mac and Linux and whatnot, I'll use IF config to look at networking information. So if you get that backwards from time to time, you're in good company, so no worries. So IF config, and that'll show us our networking information. So I have East 0, and I also have the local, so that's just going to be my loop back. So, home, you've probably seen the t-shirt, there's no place like 127.0.0.1, no place like home. Geeky joke. But we're more interested in our actual interface that talks to the internet. So my network is 192.168.1. Yours may be different. And I am .77. My net mask is 255.255.255.0. If you're unfamiliar with net masks, I may not be as familiar with them as I think I am, because I actually think I got that question wrong on my final exam in networking. But basically what it means is how many bits of the IP address belong to the network and how much are the actual host. So in this case, it says my first 3 octets are going to belong to the network. So 192.168.1 are all part of the network. So that means everything on this network is going to be 192.168.1, and then everything from .1, which is probably the router, all the way to 254, because 255 is the broadcast. So we actually see that here. So that's going to basically call out to everyone. So I have all those IP addresses, again, between probably 2, because 1's probably the router, and 254 that can be assigned. In this case, I'm 77. So this is a /24. So this would be 192.168.1.1/24. That's just another way of representing this net mask. So that's saying that 24 bits are going to be part of the network. So 8, 16, 24. So you could also say have a /16, so that would be 255.255.0.0, and then only 192 and 168 would be part of the network. So then we could have .1, .2, .3, all the way to .254, and then 1 through 254 on all those as well. So a bit more space. So again, certainly you can read networking books. It's basically anything that you can learn about computer science is ultimately going to help you in pen testing. I spent way too much time looking at things from computer science that I didn't pay attention to when I should have, thinking I would never need them. So it's definitely, if you do have a computer science background, it is worth it. And, if you want to spend your time reading networking manuals, it'll only help you in the long run. So you can also set a static IP address, because again, by default, it does use DHCP. So that is going to get it to grab an IP address each time, but then your IP address might change. So it probably won't from just day to day, but it might over time if you restart the VM enough. And certainly when you go to other locations, you'll get a new IP address. But we might not want that to happen. Like, for instance, if you're shooting a video for a class, you may want to have the same IP address all the time. So what I can do in Linux for that is I can do nano or vi /etc. So in the etc directory from root /network /interfaces. So yours is going to look a little bit different from mine. You're actually not going to have this part. So you should have iface, eth0, inet, and then DHCP, whereas mine says static. And then these 3 lines here you won't have. So that's just because yours is DHCP, and I set mine to static, so my IP addresses would always be the same, so my videos at least would be consistent. So let's just change DHCP to static, and then you can give it an address. So mine's 192.168.1.77. Whatever you get from DHCP, just give it something in that range. And netmask, again, yours will probably be 255.255.255.0 if you're at home. Maybe if you're at a work network or some other enterprise, it might be different. I mean, I see /8s and /16s all the time in enterprises, but it seems like most home networks are /24. Give it the gateway. It's probably .1. It's probably what your router's IP address is. Again, if you're at home, it could be anything in an enterprise. You know, IT people have to have something to keep themselves busy, like messing with the network. So you can do this or not do this. You don't have to, certainly. And we can do service, networking, restart. To restart that, I didn't make any changes, so I'll just leave it alone. And so that's just a little bit about networking. Again, probably a class on networking you could take or a book, but just a little bit, really. I mean, as long as you can talk to other systems, like if we did a ping, so this is going to use ICMP echo, and it's going to talk to another system and see if it's alive. That said, a live system doesn't necessarily have to respond to ping. So just because it doesn't get anything back doesn't mean the system's not up. But say if I went after, I think 76 should be around, the system's alive. So I'm able to talk to another system on my network. Because I have internet access, because I'm using Bridge, I can also like ping www.google.com and talk to another system on the internet. So again, it doesn't necessarily have to respond to ping. In fact, newer Windows systems who have Windows Firewall on actually don't by default. So just because it doesn't ping doesn't mean it's not there. We'll see that there are other ways we can see whether a system is up or not. So, I mean, as long as we're able to talk on the network, when we get on a network, we want to be able to talk to other systems if we're doing pen testing. So, you really just need to know enough networking to troubleshoot if you're not getting an IP address at your client location. So, I mean, that can be rather embarrassing if it's something really simple that you couldn't figure out. So, just a little bit of networking necessary. So, one last thing. We're going to look at a tool called Netcat, which is abbreviated as NC, Netcat. So, if we do a man NC, calls itself the TCP/IP Swiss Army knife. And in fact, you could say indeed it is. Netcat is really awesome at making TCP/IP connections. Again, Q to get out of the man page. So we have a lot of different things we can do with Netcat. We can listen on a port. So Netcat-L for listen. We can listen verbosely on port. How about 1, 2, 3, 4? So that's going to listen on a port for an incoming connection. So if I open up another terminal window, in this case I'm just working with two different terminals on the same system. I could do this between systems as well if you want to pull up your Ubuntu system, your target that you downloaded. That also has Netcat on it by default, so you could actually, with the IP addresses, work between the two. So with this one, let's do a Netcat, and instead of going into listen mode with the -L, let's actively connect. So we actually have basically two ways of dealing with this. We'll see this more when we look more into pen testing, particularly in Metasploit. We'll see bind and reverse shells. So we'll call out actively with a reverse shell, and we'll listen locally, so the equivalent of our listening Netcat with a bind shell. So we'll listen for an incoming connection. So that would be two ways of making connections. Either we wait for someone to come to us, or we actively go to them. It's really just no three ways about it, just those two. So this time we are going to actively call back. In particular, we're going to call back to this guy. So again, on the same system. So let's netcat to 192.168.1. What's my IP address? I forgot. 177. So netcat NC 192.168.1.77. So I'm really just talking to myself. And then I want port 1234. So netcat, IP address, and port. We don't get anything on this end, but if we come here, we did get a connection. Because I used that -V for verbose, that does tell us for the connection. So if I say, hi Georgia, over here with our connection, it comes back over here, hello. So, a little chat program, if you will, very primitive chat program. But certainly we can do better, right? Certainly we can do better. Alright, so let's do a control C to kill it. So once we kill one, the other one will close as well. Let's again open up our listener. So I can just do the up arrow to grab the last command I had. So again, I'm going to open up a listener. But this time, I'm going to do -E at the end for execute. I'm going to tell it I want to execute bin bash. So that's actually going to be our command interpreter. When I open up my terminal, what I'm dropping into is a bash shell. So that's the underlying thing that is taking our text and knowing what to do with it. It knows what chmod means, what ls means, what grep means. So what we're doing here is setting up a listener on port 1234, and then when someone connects, it's going to execute bin bash. So it's actually going to give someone a terminal. Awesome for remote administration, maybe not so awesome for security if we just have a root shell lying around. If we start this as root, whoever attaches to it will have root privileges. Whoever starts the program makes up what the privileges are, so whoever attaches to it will have root privileges, and thus will be able to destroy the file system, read all the files, including sensitive data, and make changes. So, maybe not a good idea from a security perspective, but so it is. And again, on our other terminal, we can do the up arrow to connect. Again, our active connection. And let's see if we do an ls. See, it doesn't have a prompt. Sometimes it will give a prompt. It just depends on what kind of shell you're using. Like you can use different things besides Netcat. Like some of the things in Metasploit will give you a prompt. Some things won't. It really just depends. So I can run commands here. So I can do an ls, and again, it's in the same directory as we are here. So we're still in home Georgia. So if we do an ls, it shows me the contents of Georgia's home directory. What if we cat out etc password? Passwd. Does anybody know what's an etc password? Well, usernames. Some more information about them. We have root. There aren't any passwords or password hashes here, so that's kind of unfortunate, right? But it has like information about, like, it uses bin bash, things like that, groups, user IDs, things like that. So here's Georgia and James down here, so home directories and what kind of shell they use, user IDs. But no password hashes. That's no good. But what about, since we have root privileges, what about etc shadow? What's in the shadow file? You guessed it, password hashes. So if we can find password hashes on any of our targets in the shadow file for Linux systems, might be able to use a password cracker to reverse these. We know their password, but you know, it happens. So, a bit more interesting when we actually have a program on the other end, such as the terminal. So again, we can do a control C. One more thing we can do is we can actually use Netcat to send files. So if you're on network and you're trying to upload a file or download a file and you're not having any success with any other way of doing it, which is probably unlikely since Linux has wget. There's a few different ways to do it in Windows as well. We'll see that a bit later on when we do post-exploitation. I mean, moving files around is a rather interesting thing, but we could do Netcat if we have it. So again, we could do our Netcat listen, but this time let's do whatever comes in, let's output it into myfile3. And this time, let's let me just create a file in the root directory called myfile4. This is a secret. And do an input, so we know that the greater than sign is output. We can do a less than sign for input, so pipe it into our command. So I'll give it myfile4. That connects. If we kill it, we cat out myfile3. this is a secret. So it took the text from my file 4 and put it in my file 3. So again, in this case, since we're on the same system, all we've really done is done the copy command over the network on a local system. But moving it between different systems, you can see how this might be useful. It is one way of transferring files. We will see additional ones, but it's certainly worth knowing. So let's see. How about one more thing, and then we'll call it a day on Linux and move on. So let's see. How about cron tabs? So automating tasks. Everybody likes to automate tasks, right? Particularly if you're a pen tester and you want access to stick around forever. What if I wanted to check periodically whether there were any commands that needed to be run? Well, Linux has a way of doing this. Windows does as well. But in Linux, it uses something called cron jobs. So if we go into the etc directory with cd, we do an ls and pipe that into grep and ask for cron. It'll show us a cron. So if we look at cron tab, this is basically our list of jobs. You can add something here that has default ones like you saw them here, like daily, hourly, monthly, weekly. The things that are run on a regular basis. But we can add something as well. We can either add something to one of these. So if I did cron.daily, I could add something to be run here daily. Or if I needed to be a bit more specific, I could add something here. So it is minute, hour, day of the month, and then day of the week. So here's one that's hourly. So it says on the 17th minute of every hour of every day of the month of every day of the week. So that makes sense, right? Hourly, every 17th minute of every hour, it's going to run whatever in the hourly. Likewise here, the next one down, we have daily. So let's see, it runs on the 25th minute of the 6th hour of every day. So indeed that's daily. What if I wanted to add my own here rather than add it into one of the cron tabs? What if I wanted to make it run every minute? Maybe that would be a little bit excessive. But what if I did? And then the user, I would say root, and I want to run the command netcat -lvp 1234. So every minute it's going to run netcat. Go ahead and save that, and should have to do service cron tab, service cron restart the scheduler. So then if we do, might have to wait a minute. See Apache's listening. Give it a second and that should run. A minute never seemed so long. That obviously didn't work. There we go, there it is. That really was a long minute. Okay, we must have been like in the middle of minutes or something. So there it is. So it's listening on 1, 2, 3, 4. So a really simple example there. In fact, let's get rid of it. It just keeps stepping on itself. But that might be something we want to do for persistence, maybe. But we can add things. And again, you can add them into like those cron.dailies, hourlies, monthlies, weeklies as well. Of course, we wouldn't see it happen quite so quickly. Not really appropriate for a video to have to wait for an hour. So again, if we need more ability to change the times, we can do straight in the schedule like that, like we just did. So again, it's a kind of brief introduction to Linux. I certainly encourage you to become more familiar with Linux, and then hopefully you will be a grand Linux expert, probably more so than me even, but in general, it's just certainly worth knowing for pen testing, because again, a lot of your pen testing tools are going to be built into Kali Linux, and many of them may not even have a Windows or Mac version for you to use, so if you aren't familiar with this platform, you won't be able to get the most out of your pen testing arsenal.